Let's go ahead and talk about color inside of Photoshop, because color is something that you're going to work with all the time. Even a basic black and white image is still made up of color information. So you'll need to know how to do some of the things with color in Photoshop, and I'll give you a brief overview of how those work. So for starters, let's go to the top and click on the Image tab in the menu bar at the top here, and we're going to click on Mode. And mode is going to show us the different color modes that we can have. So as you can see, we have bitmap, grayscale, index color, RGB color, which is what we're using right now, CMYK color, lab color, and multi-channel. RGB is probably going to be the most common one that you'll work with whenever you're doing any type of screen images. So for graphic design on the screen or television or the internet, web design, those kinds of things, they're all going to be RGB. CMYK color is probably going to be your most common one that you'll use for print. So if you're printing out illustrations or brochures or graphics or posters or anything like that, you'll probably use CMYK. And then there's some other color modes that are pretty common here too. Then we have how much bits there are per channel, and this is pertaining also to the color. So 8 bits per channel is going to be, there's going to be a lower level of color throughout the image. 16 bits is going to have more colors associated with that, and then 32 bits is going to have the highest amount of color range. And you need to keep in mind that as you adjust these to higher color levels, adding more colors to the image, it's also going to add on to the file size. So you'll want to keep that in mind. Right now we're at red, green, blue RGB color at 8 bits per channel. There's also some other color adjustments that you can make in the Image tab and in different things like the filters. We'll go into those a little bit later on, but for now let's just take a look at the basics of the colors. The first time you'll probably interact with color will be with the foreground and background color swatches in the toolbar. So in the bottom left hand corner you can see we have our foreground and our background colors. And if we just click on this, it's going to open up our color picker. This will allow us to choose a color based on these scales here, so we can select what color we want and if we want it to be lighter or darker. You can also choose your hue, saturation, and value numbers, your red, green, and blue numbers, lab colors, and CMYK. And if you have a hex code, you can type that in. These things are popular when you're doing things like web design to know exactly what that color is. You can also select only web colors for browsers that only support a certain amount of colors. Used to be more common back in the day to use this often. Nowadays, most browsers and screen resolutions can handle up to 16 and 32-bit colors, so it's not such a big deal, but you'll want to keep that in mind. Then we also have color libraries and the ability to add this to swatches. Now, swatches are individual colors that you can save. So as you begin working, if you wanted to say use these colors up here in this image, these greens and blues and reds specifically, you could save out those colors into what we call swatches and reuse them later on. Now, over on the right hand side, we have our color panel open with the same kind of color picker. And there's also a swatches panel. If we click on that, you can actually see all of the different swatches here. And these are some pre-made swatches that Photoshop has loaded up for you to use. And you can add to these. So again, if we chose a color and say we just pick that color and we hit add to swatches, it'll ask us what we want to call this. So let's just say burgundy, add to my current library, we hit OK, and we'll cancel that out. And now you can see it's actually dropped that burgundy color down here in the swatches. So you can have presets of colors that you can use, and you can have different presets. So you might have one preset for web design and one preset for something else, or maybe for the specific project that you're working on, you have just those colors. And then when you start a new project, you have a different set of colors. You have all of these options in this menu. Over on the right-hand side, you see these horizontal lines. And when I open that up, it gives us all kinds of different other color options in the swatches panel. So we can have different size thumbnails, or if we want to look in a list view, we can do that. We can load and save swatches. So here's a great place where if we want to have our own swatches saved out for later use, we can do that. And then there's a lot of pre-made swatch pickers that you can choose here. So for instance, I can pick one of these, like the Pantone Solid Coated, and it's going to say replace current swatches with the swatches from the Pantone Solid Coated. We'll hit OK. And save changes to the current swatches before replacing them. Because we added a color, we don't need to save it. We'll hit no. And now you can see that it changed out our swatches to that Pantone color swatch library that you can pick from. And when you click on that, you have access to all those pre-made swatch libraries, or you can create your own. Also, you're going to find colors with all kinds of different tools. So if we select the brush tool, when you begin coloring, you will be using your foreground color here, or you can pick a color over from the color picker or the swatches. Other things, like if you select a gradient tool, you can see that at the top we have this gradient, and if we select it, we have the ability to change colors based on the gradient, either by presets, or we can select these individual pickers and change the color here also. So those different types of color picker boxes you will see all over the place, and you'll want to keep that in mind because that's where you will be able to change the color. Same thing with the type tool. If I bring up the type tool, there's a color swatch right up there, and I can change this to a new color, and then when I drop in that type, it'll be that blue color that we picked. So you'll see these little color swatch boxes all over the place, and you want to keep that in mind that you can either pick those through the color picker or through swatches that you've made. Finally, another tool that you'll want to probably use often is both the eyedropper tool and the color sampler tool. So over in the tools bar, you can see the shortcut key I, and the first one selected is the eyedropper tool. And what this does is it allows us to select a color from the image. So say I want to use this specific orange here or red here, I can use the eyedropper tool to select that, and it brings it into the foreground for us. So now we have that color picked. I can select my brush, and then when I color, I have that color picked out. So we'll just undo that. And if I select that tool and I hold it down, you can actually see as I move around what the previous color selected is, or what color you have currently selected is, and then the top half of that circle is going to show the new color, and that gives you just a good way to see differences in what you have selected in other colors. So this is a great way for me to pick different colors here and see the differences. The other tool that you might want to use is the color sampler tool, and this is going to give us information on the colors on the screen, such as the RGB values or the CMYK values, and that can be very helpful as you begin working with color. If I click one time, it'll drop a little dot there for me, and it'll pull up the info panel, and as I move around the screen, you can actually see that those numbers are changing based on the color. So if this isn't perfectly white, but if I hover over the white area, you can see it's almost white because the RGB values are all even, almost up to 255. You can see the CMYK values and other different things in that info panel. And we can actually drop multiple color picks here and use those later on to see all the different informations. You can see they're numbered here. Number 1, the first one we picked was this red, and its RGB value, number 2, 3, 4, and so on. So that is another tool. It's called the color sampler tool, and it'll give you information about the colors that you're picking to help you out in your designs. So that's kind of a brief overview of how you can use colors and pick colors inside of Photoshop. Later on in the color section, we'll really dive deep into using colors and setting up swatches and all of those good things.